Snowflakes drifted through the dark night sky, soft but relentless, covering the empty streets of downtown Chicago like a quiet sorrow. The city lights blurred through the falling snow, and beneath a flickering street lamp, a woman stood holding her little boy close to her chest. Her coat was too thin for the freezing cold, her breath visible as she whispered soft words to calm the trembling child. She had been walking for hours, from shelter to shelter, every door either full or closed. The night had grown heavier, crueler, and now she stood at the bus stop, unsure if the last bus would even come. Her son's face was buried in her shoulder, his small hands gripping her coat, his voice weak and sleepy. "Mommy, are we going home now?" She wanted to say yes, but there was no home anymore. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of a single good heart to change someone's life, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because stories like this one remind us that love can find you even when you've lost everything. Her name was Lena Carter, once a proud woman who had worked as a nurse in a small community hospital. Life had never been easy, but she had managed to smile through it all. Until one winter night, her husband Mark left without a word, leaving her with a mountain of bills and a 3-year-old boy named Ethan. She tried everything: longer shifts, smaller meals, skipping her own needs to feed her child. But the storm of debt grew faster than her courage could carry. Then came the eviction notice. She spent the next nights on benches, in waiting rooms, in churches that welcomed her only for warmth, not for sleep. Yet through it all, she never let her son see her cry. That night she had walked miles hoping for a miracle. Maybe someone kind enough to offer a ride, or a stranger's smile to remind her that the world wasn't all cruel. But the city seemed too busy to notice her pain. She stood now under a bus shelter, snow clinging to her hair and lashes, her shoes soaked through, her lips trembling as she hummed a lullaby. Across the street, through the blur of streetlights and exhaust, a man watched her silently. He was tall, wrapped in a dark navy coat, his hands buried in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He had been standing there for some time, waiting, or maybe thinking. The night was his least favorite time of day, the quiet reminding him of everything he had lost: a marriage, a family, and the feeling of being needed by anyone. His name was Daniel Hayes, a 34-year-old architect who had everything once: money, a career, a beautiful apartment overlooking the lake, but nothing that felt like home anymore. His wife had left 2 years ago, taking their unborn child after a miscarriage tore their relationship apart. Since then, Daniel had walked these same streets almost every night, trying to fill the silence with the sound of the city. That night, he wasn't waiting for anyone, but fate was. He saw Lena first as just another stranger in the snow, until he noticed the little boy in her arms, the way she wrapped her coat around him, though she was freezing herself. Something about that sight, the quiet bravery, the exhaustion, broke something in him. He crossed the street slowly, his boots crunching through the fresh snow, his heart heavy with the thought of what he might say. She saw him approaching and instinctively stepped back, fear flashing in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered quickly. "We're just waiting for the bus." Her voice was thin, fragile, like glass about to crack. Daniel nodded softly. "It's okay," he said, his voice warm despite the cold. "But I don't think the buses are running anymore." Lena looked away, her lips trembling as she tried to hide her despair. Ethan shifted in her arms, his face pale, his little hands cold despite the gloves. She whispered softly to him, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Daniel's chest tightened. He could see the truth in her eyes, that she was trying to be strong for her son, that she was carrying the weight of a world that never gave her rest. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled down the empty street, and a neon diner sign flickered across the road, its windows glowing warmly against the frozen night. Daniel looked toward it and then back at her. "Look," he said quietly, pointing to the diner. "It's open. Why don't you both come inside, just for a while, get warm?" She hesitated. Trust didn't come easily anymore. The world had taken too much from her to leave room for hope. I can't," she whispered. "We don't have money." Daniel's answer came before she could finish. "I didn't ask for money. just warmth. For a few seconds, she stood still, clutching her son, torn between pride and desperation. Then Ethan whispered in her ear, "Mommy, I'm cold." That was all it took. She nodded silently, and Daniel led the way through the snow. The diner was almost empty. Just the smell of coffee, the hiss of the heater, and the low hum of an old jukebox playing something soft. The waitress gave them a curious look but said nothing as Daniel guided them to a booth near the window. Lena sat down carefully, her coat still wrapped around her son, who was too tired to even lift his head. Daniel signaled for hot chocolate and soup. When the cups arrived, the warmth hit her hands like a miracle. She whispered a thank you so faint he almost didn't hear it. Ethan sipped from his cup, his eyes lighting up for the first time that night. Watching him, Daniel felt a strange ache, something between sadness and hope, something he hadn't felt in years. As they sat there, he learned bits and pieces of her story, not through words, but through the silences between them, the worn shoes, the trembling hands, the way she glanced at the clock as if she was afraid time would run out. He realized she was more than just another struggling soul. She was a mother fighting the kind of battle most people couldn't imagine. After an hour, Lena looked down, embarrassed. "We should go," she said softly. "We've taken too much of your time." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said gently. "You haven't." Then almost without thinking, he added, "Where will you go?" She hesitated, her voice cracking as she answered, "We have nowhere to go." The diner went quiet. Even the sound of the coffee machine faded behind her words. Daniel looked at her, and without a second thought, he whispered back, "You do now." That night, he drove them to his small apartment overlooking the city. It wasn't much, just one bedroom and a couch. But it was warm, and the lights felt softer than they had in years. Lena tried to refuse, but exhaustion and the sight of her sleeping child melted her pride. He laid out blankets on the couch and offered her the bedroom, but she insisted on sharing the couch with her son. For the first time in months, Ethan slept without shivering. Daniel stayed up late, sitting near the window, watching the snow fall, wondering how two strangers could feel so connected in such a short time. The next morning, he woke up to the sound of laughter, the kind that fills an empty home with life. Ethan was running around the living room with Daniel's old baseball cap, and Lena stood in the kitchen making coffee. She looked different in the daylight, still tired but alive. He realized then that sometimes the most broken people carry the brightest light. Days turned into weeks. Daniel helped Lena find a small job at an old friend's clinic. He taught Ethan how to build Lego towers and made pancakes every Sunday morning. Slowly, the walls that pain had built around their hearts began to crumble. Lena smiled again. Daniel laughed again. The apartment that once felt silent now echoed with warmth and small moments of joy. Moments that stitched two lonely souls into something that looked like a family. But healing is never easy. One night, Lena found an envelope Daniel had left on the counter. A letter to his late wife, one he wrote every year on the same day. She realized how deep his pain still ran, and instead of feeling distant, she understood him even more. The next morning, she left a note on the same table. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. We may have nowhere to go, but now we have somewhere to belong." Months later, the first snow of spring drifted across the sky, soft and slow. Daniel stood by the window, watching Ethan draw on the glass with his finger, while Lena placed a blanket around his shoulders. He looked at her, smiling for the first time without sorrow in his eyes. They had built something rare, not out of romance alone, but out of rescue, respect, and hope. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that even one act of kindness can change a life, please like, comment, and share this video. Your support helps us spread more stories of love, compassion, and second chances. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what's one kind thing someone once did for you that you'll never forget? Because sometimes all it takes is one person to stop in the snow and say, "You do now."